about to enter the wilderness. Are you ready? All right, so we'll start off with Jacob's wilderness. So Jacob left Beersheba and he went toward Haran. And he came to a certain place, and he stayed there that night because the sun had set. Taking one of the stones of the place, he put it under his head and lay down in that place to sleep. So look where Jacob is. The only thing that we're told here is that he's in a certain place. In fact, in the first two verses here, either certain place or the place is mentioned 3 times. And that's significant for what we're going to be talking about today because it's basically biblical language, meaning that he's somewhere in the wilderness. He's in the middle of nowhere. So he's in between Beersheba, which he left, and Haran, where he's going to, and he takes a break in the middle of nowhere. There's no city, no town, no inn for him to stay. There's no safety. There's critters and maybe bandits and just barren ground. And the sun sets on him, and he takes a stone and he uses it for a pillow. Have you ever went camping, forgot your pillow? It's not a fun thing. You try to invent something soft. But we can get a little glimpse of Jacob in the sense that he goes for something hard. He goes for a stone to lay his head. And it really communicates to you that Jacob right now is alone. He's vulnerable. He's exposed. And it's not just the fact that he's in this physical wilderness, but he's carrying things on that journey. He's running from consequences. He lied to his father. He stole from his brother. And now Esau, his twin, wants to kill him. He's separated from everything that is familiar to him. His mother, his father, his home, his surroundings. And he has no idea what the future holds. Will Esau hunt him down on this journey? Will the father allow him in when he comes to Haran? How are they going to receive him in Haran? He has no reference point. He doesn't know anything. The only thing that he knows is that he is all alone. And it's really based on some of the decisions and the consequences that he made. He is all alone. And I'm sure that he's shackled with guilt and fear and uncertainty. Because that's the wilderness too. The wilderness is not just a physical space, but it's a season. And this season can be one that's spiritual, emotional, relational, as well as physical. It's a season that can be filled with depression and loneliness. It's the aftermath of bad decisions. And sometimes there are people that are victims and they're caught in this wilderness. It's a hard season in your life where you feel alone and a time of turmoil, grief, and loss. Where the future is just uncertain. You don't know what's going to happen. Have you been there? Have you been in that wilderness? You don't know what's going to happen. But you know something is going to change. And Jacob is in it. He's in that wilderness when the future is uncertain and he's just trying to survive. And what he doesn't know yet, he has no idea that God is about to meet him there. Because God is the one that bridges the gap. And he dreamed, and behold, there was a ladder set up on the earth, and the top of it reached toward heaven. And behold, the angels of God were ascending and descending on it. And behold, the Lord stood above it and said, I am the Lord, the God of Abraham, your father, and the God of Isaac. Jacob dreams here. He sees a ladder, or it can be also translated as a staircase to, if you've ever seen ziggurnauts. Think about the Tower of Babel, where there's these stairways that lead to heaven. And this staircase, it says here, is set up on earth. And it reaches to the heavens. It's a powerful picture there. If Jacob needed to have some assurance, this was the perfect time for God to come up to him and tell him that he is the Lord. He is the God of Abraham, your forefather. And he is the God of your father. And what he's communicating to Jacob right now is, and I'm going to be the God of you. The ladder. Something very important here. It says in the text that the ladder was set up by God. In other words, this is entirely 100% a divine intervention. It's a divine initiative. It's not something that Jacob earned. It's not something that he was going to get because he was behaving better. But it was a dream that God gave him to remind him that he's not alone in the wilderness. The ladder was set up by God while Jacob was sleeping. God was already establishing the connection between heaven and earth. Why? As we already talked about, it wasn't because Jacob earned this. It was because of God's covenant faithfulness. God had swore to Abraham about his descendants. And no matter how much we mess up our lives, God cannot be unfaithful to his promises. No matter how many times we break our promises, God cannot do that. And somehow he works with the mess of the decisions that we make, and he uses them for his glory. Think about this here. The top of this staircase or ladder, it reaches to heaven. And when you think about this, you're supposed to get this image of Genesis chapter 11, when the people gathered together that were scattered and they tried to build this stairway to God, right? But this one reaches from earth to heaven. It's a completed ladder or staircase. It's something that doesn't fall, this is 90% to heaven. Or this is, almost to heaven. But this is a ladder that reveals to you that God is present in your wilderness. And not only that, he bridges this gap and he sends some friends, the angels. And what are we told about the angels? Is that they were ascending and descending from here. And I think it's important to understand this, is that the first term that's mentioned is that the angels were ascending and then descending. And why is that important to mention? Because it communicates that they were already on earth. And they were already with Jacob. God's protection was already in place. They ascended first, and then they descended. That's powerful. When you think about those wilderness times in your life, it's important. Because Jacob, he may have felt alone. He may not have sensed any of God's presence there. He would have never thought that angels were ministering to him. But this passage shows you that God meets you in your wilderness. In your wilderness where you feel alone, abandoned, forgotten, God is already there. Yeah, you can't see it. You feel alone, abandoned, forgotten, but God is always there. They're already ministering to him. And he had no idea. And you may be going through those seasons in life, and you may not have any idea here, but if you are a faithful follower of God, he meets you there. Because that's who God is. And in this sequence, he gives 4 promises. And the 4 promises are, and behold, the Lord stood above it. Okay, first of all, he wants to communicate who he is. Okay? So the Lord stands above it and said, I am the Lord, the God of Abraham, your father, and the God of Isaac. It's a clear identification. Just because you're in a dream and you see this, staircase or ladder, I want you to know that this isn't a pagan God. This isn't your imagination or your typical dream. Sometimes the dreams make no sense at all. But he identifies himself at the top of this staircase. He's in heaven and he identifies himself. And imagine if you're Jacob and you're sleeping and he wants you to know, I'm the Lord of Abraham, the God of your father Isaac. And so the 4 promises go like this. I am with you. And what that communicates again is this understanding that in your wilderness God is present. In all of your hardships and trials, God is there with you. In the hard place, in the tough times, God is there. And God breaks his silence here so that Jacob knows that I am with you. He's not saying, I'll be with you if you get your act all right. He's not saying when you get to Haran, then I'll be with you. He's saying right now, in the midst of this deception, in the midst of this betrayal, in the midst of your decisions, you need to know, I am here with you. The second thing he says is, I will keep you. And that communicates protection. God promises to guard Jacob, to protect him, to watch over him. Wherever he goes, whether he goes to Haran, whether he goes back home, whether he goes anywhere, God wants to know that he is going to protect you and he's going to keep you. He says, I will bring you back. And it's a reference to the land. Because Abraham was promised the promised land. And so he's going to Haran, away from the promised land. And he wants Jacob to know, nothing is going to happen to you. I will bring you back to the promised land. You will have descendants. You will multiply. You will be faithful and fruitful. You just need to know. Right now, you're in the wilderness. But the wilderness is a season. The wilderness is temporary. And then he says, I will not leave you. And that's a stamp. That's a promise. That when you're in the wilderness, when you're struggling, when you're trying to figure out what's going to happen, he says, don't worry, you're never going to be in this alone. I will be there. God's presence doesn't depend on Jacob's performance. It depends on God's faithfulness. And that's the promise for you in your own wildernesses. He says, I am with you. I will keep you. I will bring you back. And I will not leave you. And how does Jacob respond? He says, I did not know it. Then Jacob awoke from his sleep and said, and concluded, surely this is the Lord. The Lord is in this place. And I did not know it. I mean, isn't that reassuring to you to think about that? Again, you might not even sense that God's there. Jacob had no idea he's running for his life, his decisions, the consequences of his decisions. And God shows grace by breaking through and reminding him, you're not alone. And Jacob says, surely the Lord is in this place. And I did not know it. Jacob didn't see it. He didn't feel it. He didn't sense it. But God was there all along. Take courage, because when you feel alone, you're not. God is there with you. When you can't feel his presence, God has not left you. See, looking back, we see that what we couldn't see at the moment. So in the moment of your wilderness wanderings, you can't see it. But once you're brought out of it, and you reflect back at your life, and you remember that particular time in the wilderness when you had no direction, you didn't know what was going to happen, You can conclude, I didn't see it. I didn't know it. But the Lord was in this place. I just didn't know it at the time. But I know it now. And you know one of the reasons God puts us in this wilderness? It's to minister us, sure. It's to restore us, yes. But it's also to heal us to the point where when other people are going through their wilderness wanderings, we can be of an assistance to them by sharing our story. It's one of the greatest things when it comes to evangelism and just sharing your faith. Sometimes Christians, they come across like you're the one that I need to save. Instead of communicating, man, I was right there in that wilderness. I know what you're going through. And I didn't feel God. I didn't sense His presence. But He was there. And now I know it. And I know that He's in your wilderness as well. See, the wilderness that we go through, we can't just forget about them because they've made us who we are and they've made us stronger and they've given us a story. And one of the things that we need as Christians, especially when it comes to sharing our faith, are stories. Stories of what we went through and how God brought us through them. And how does Jacob respond here? This is where the story gets a little bit interesting here. From Luz to Bethel. So early in the morning, Jacob took the stone that he had put under his head and set it up for a pillar and poured oil on top of it. And he called the name of that place Bethel. And the author tells us, but the name of that city was, what was it called again? Luz. It was called Luz. Luz means almond tree. In other words, there was nothing significant about this place. It was just an empty, void area with some almond trees. What are we going to name this place? Let's call it Almond Tree because that's all this city has is an almond tree. Luz. And Jacob renames it Bethel, which the Bethel part, like Bethlehem or Beit, it's called Beit in the Hebrew. Bethel means house. House. El means God. So he named this place, this Luz place, this almond tree place, this wilderness place where nothing is there. He names it the house of God. Because in my wilderness, God showed up in this place. And so now that wilderness becomes sacred ground. The place of fear becomes the place of God's encounter. The place of loneliness becomes the place of presence. It's when God meets you in the wilderness. When He meets you in your wilderness, everything changes. Everything changes. I wish this was the end of the story. But there's some troubling components to it. And it's something that as Christians we're all susceptible to it. And what I'm talking about is, I'm talking about the problem of man-made religion. The definition of man-made religion is performance, performance oriented, okay? And so this is what's troubling. This is his response to God. God gave him promises, and he says, if God will be with me, and if he will keep me the way that I go, and if he will give me bread to eat and clothing to wear, and if he does that so that I can come back to my Father's house in peace, then the Lord shall be my God. And so you see what's going on here. And if you don't see it clearly, let me show you a parallel here because I think it's quite revealing. The parallel here is God's promises versus Jacob's conditions. God promises to him, I am with you. Jacob responds, if God will be with me. God says, I will keep you wherever you go. Jacob says, if he will keep me in the way that I go. God says, I will bring you back to this land, this promised land, the land of your fathers. He says, if I come again to my father's house in peace. God says, I will not leave you. And this is implied, if you don't abandon me. He's concluding, if all of these things fall in line, then you'll be my God. Can you see this? He's actually repeating back the very promises that God made that were unconditional. Jacob is putting conditions on them. He takes God's unconditional promises and he turns it into a performance contract. Athletes have that. If you score this many touchdowns, you get a bonus on your check. And so these are performance-laden contracts. Jacob gives God one. Jacob took God's free gift and he tried to negotiate it. Why? Because Jacob is a work in progress. He is a schemer. He is a manipulator. He wants to get the best of everything. And at a certain point in our faith, sometimes the focus can only be on ourselves. When you grow in your faith, the focus goes outward. You don't think about yourself as much. Jacob is saying, if you do this for me, then we can talk. Then you could be my God. He has faith, but he has faulty faith because he's a work in progress. And what he's saying is backwards. And then he says in verse 22, he says, if all of this goes according to the way that I just lined out my contract, and this stone which I have set for my pillar, it shall be called God's house. Now, I want you to ponder that for a second. Because what he's saying here is that he's going to build God a house if he basically does everything that he wants him to do. And if you look at this, you can see the irony here because God is the one that built that connection in the first place. He set up the staircase. He bridged the gap from heaven to earth. And Jacob says, if you do what I say, I'll build you a house. And here's the tragic part. If you know anything about the city of Bethel, the house of God, eventually this man-made religion, performance clause oriented, it led to them committing acts of idolatry. In fact, they reestablished religion that was a man-made religion. They put in their own priests. They said, we don't want to go to Jerusalem. We don't want to have anything to do with them. We want to be our own. And they set up golden calves on the north and the south. And they became this place that is no longer the house of God, but the house of idols. And in the process, the leaders of Bethel at that time, this is like hundreds of years later, they dedicate this place and they go, "Behold your gods, O Israel, who brought you out of Egypt." And that takes you back to where? The golden calf in Egypt. Because that's the exact things they said. Man-made religion. It was built in rebellion to having to go to Jerusalem and the south. And it was built in defiance of God's instructions. And the northern kingdom eventually was conquered and deported to Assyria because of judgment and false worship. Bethel, the place of the ladder, the place of divine grace, it gets corrupted by human effort. Babel versus Bethel. Religion versus grace. I'm just going to run through this real quick so you can get the idea of religion versus God's grace. Religion says, let us build human initiative. Grace says, God set it up, divine initiative. Man-made religion is bottom up. I'm going to work myself up. That's kind of corporate view. From God's perspective, it's top down. Babel doesn't reach heaven. They tried to build it to heaven so that God can come down. But God confuses the language and has judgment there. And they never complete the work. Bethel does reach heaven. The staircase is not short. It is not completed. But it is reality. Babel, the result is judgment and confusion of languages and separating them because they were supposed to scatter and share God's message. But they decided to stick together. We can do something and make our name great. The result, judgment. For Bethel, the result was blessing and presence and promise. It's so important for us to know as Christians the difference between man-made religion and divine grace. It is so theologically important for us to be able to understand that and to articulate that. Human-made religion is based on man's performance. Grace is strictly something that God gives us. And so as we conclude here, Jesus comes 2,000 years later. In John 1:51, he's basically assigning his disciples. And he comes around, and there's a man named Nathanael. It says in John 1:51, and Jesus said to him, "Truly, truly, I say to you, you will see heaven opened and the angels of God ascending and descending on the sons of man." Isn't that beautiful? Jesus meets Nathanael, and he references Jacob's ladder. He says, "I saw you under a tree." Many scholars believe that Nathanael was under the tree and he was meditating or reading Jacob's ladder. And Jesus tells him, don't worry, that wasn't just something that happened in the past, but you will see heaven opened and the angels of God ascending and descending on the sons of man. Jesus is the ladder. And it's not built by man, but it's provided by God. And you don't bargain with Jesus. You don't say, if you do this, then I will follow you. Jesus says to you, I am the way. I am the truth. I am the life. Nobody comes to the Father except through me. The difference between Babel and Bethel is the difference between religion and grace. Babel says, let's build it. Bethel says, God set it up. And Jacob got it backwards. He tried to bargain and he tried to build, but God still met him anyway. And he will also meet you in the wilderness, because he says to you, I am with you. I will keep you. I will not leave you. There are no conditions, but it's a covenant to his followers. And so with all that said, I just want to conclude with, if you're in a wilderness now, or if you know somebody that's in a wilderness season, again, it could be physical, it could be emotional, it could be spiritual, relational, it could be depression, it could be grief, it could be loss, many things. It could be physical ailments and pain. It's important that you be able to communicate and understand that God is with you. You're not alone. Even if you can't feel him or sense him, God is there. He's already there, and he bridges the gap between earth and heaven. He has angels ascending and descending because he's with you where you're at now. And Jesus, at the end of his ministry, tells his disciples he's not going to leave them as orphans. He says, I am with you. I will not leave you. And again, if you're in the wilderness today, one day, maybe not today, maybe not next week, but one day, you'll look back at your wilderness and you'll say, surely the Lord was in this place and I didn't know it. Let's pray.